I'm Lindy. I work for the Endangered Wildlife Trust's Birds of Prey program. So I'll just give a quick outline of what I'm going to talk about today. I'll briefly touch on the African vulture crisis. Brent already did such a great introduction this morning. Then we'll talk about some of the breeding monitoring we're doing, and then the wing tagging that forms part of that, and then briefly introduce our Vulture Safe Zone project, which is a collaborative project, and talk very quickly about wildlife poisoning response training and the important collaborations we have. So, the African vulture crisis. We know this is happening from what Brent very eloquently introduced us to this morning. We know vulture populations are declining all over Africa, and we know they have huge cultural services they provide, ecosystem services they provide, but importantly, when it comes to convincing the public and decision makers, we have to show that they have economic worth too. So there was this paper that was done after the Asian vulture crisis in the 1990s, and they estimated the cost, the ecosystem services that vultures provide in terms of healthcare came to $34 billion over 14 years. There was a paper this year from Keith Goldstein and colleagues, and he looked at the cleaning services provided by turkey vultures in the Americas, and he estimated they save us more than $500,000 each year. And then this was a third paper I found looking at the ecotourism potential that vultures could add to a nature reserve of Israel, and they estimated the vultures would add on more than $1 million. And there's many more papers like this if you just Google. So they have massive economic worth, and still their numbers are declining. So this is why we work across South Africa on a range of projects, conservation and research projects, trying to make a difference with these birds. So moving on to our breeding monitoring that we do, we mainly focused on the hooded vultures for obvious reasons. I started working on it before I joined the EWT, so my project's been swallowed up by them. And so we've got 165 hooded vulture nests that we monitor each year. Most of these are inactive, but it's always great finding new nests and finding old ones being revisited. And we've got more than 500 whiteback vulture nests in the Lowveld and also in the Kalahari that we're monitoring at least 3 times every breeding season. And why do we do this? Firstly, to look at nest occupancy, so how many of these nests are actually being used each year, what is the breeding success, and then what are those causes of mortality, to try and get an idea of these trends across years. So this leads into our wing tagging work. These patagial wing tags, so the yellow ones that you can see on the vulture's wings there, these have been used for tracking and monitoring vultures in South Africa since the 1980s, Alan Kemp. And in about 2006, 2007, the Birds of Prey program did an assessment and a review of the pros and cons of different techniques. And after extensive assessment, they decided we'll go ahead and we'll start doing this in South Africa. So these are the wing tags, the cattle ear tags actually that we use to mark vultures. We trim the edges of that little tag at the top, and that's the applicator pin that we use. And when you tag the vulture, it looks like this when you put it back in its nest. Similarly, same thing with adults as well. There's different kinds you can use, so we use the hard plastic tags. You can use the soft vinyl tags as well, and I know there's going to be a talk on this later this session, so I won't go any more into that. But in our resightings database, which is the point of this tagging, people phone in or they email or WhatsApp us and say, we've seen bird A123 eating at this vulture restaurant. So that's really interesting for us to find out where they're moving, how long they're living, things like that. So we've got more than 80,000 records since this project began, and we've recently started submitting these records to SAFRING so that if people from other organizations or members of the public want to know more, they can contact us or they can contact SAFRING. So this is a heat map of the vulture resightings. It was kindly made by Gareth Tate, and it shows where the hotspots are, where the resightings have occurred. And it nicely highlights the 5 major trapping and tagging points that we have in southern Africa. So there's the Kruger Lowveld area where I work, the Zululand project where a number of people in the room work, the Mukala John Field site, Bohalisbach, and Namibia. And this tag is an example of one we would use on low-felt birds. It's got an A prefix. So if you see that, you know it's tagged in the low-felt. And this circle here is where we do our trapping, and the little pinkish spots there that I hope you can see are where birds have travelled to. So these A-series birds have gone as far north as northern Zimbabwe, northern Namibia, so they really do travel, and it's great to get resightings from these places. So to look at where we've done the tagging, this pie chart breaks down the tagging sites by land use type, and you can see the yellow segment at the bottom there that occupies 51% of all tagging opportunities. That they were mostly done in protected areas. And if you compare that with our resightings information, again it breaks down all the resighting data we have by land use type, and by far the biggest chunk of those resightings, 82% of them, correspond to Vulture restaurants. So these are really important places. Places like Moholoholo and Vulture are getting those resightings. I think it also increases public participation. When people see these tags, they're interested, hopefully they're phoned in or they let people know about it. But also landowners, sometimes if they see a dead bird with a wing tag on, they'll report it. So they'll report it to someone, and eventually whoever tagged it will hear through the grapevine that their bird has died. And if you go and investigate along the power line or wherever it died, you might find 10 more birds that died in the same way. But because they weren't tagged, the farmer doesn't think it's important. So he'll only report his wing tagged birds. So I think that's also an interesting bonus for tagging them. Okay, so moving on briefly to our collaborative Vulture Safe Zone project. The Vulture Safe Zones were first used in Asia after the Asian vulture crisis to combat the main threat to vultures there, which was diclofenac. So this drug, veterinary drug given to cattle, which proved very toxic to vultures and very close to wiping out all the vultures in India, Pakistan, places like that. So this is just a diagram showing the countries where this happened. The shades of red and pink are where the vultures occur, their ranges, and then the little rings, the dashed rings, are the vulture safe zones. So this shows 11 of those vulture safe zones. And within each of those areas, the people would work to identify threats to vultures and then try and mitigate those threats, and if possible, completely remove those threats. And an important part of this process was directly involving the landowners and the stakeholders. So this is what we want to replicate here. Although in Africa, it's more challenging potentially because there's a lot of threats to vultures here. So we have drowning in farm dams. I know Brett touched on this already. There's electrocutions, there's poisoning, both intentional and unintentional, and that includes lead poisoning and collisions with power lines, to name but a few. There's many more. So to identify the areas that we thought would be good to start off with for these vulture safe zones, we used GPS tracking data and species distribution modeling, and we came up with 3 hotspots for vulture activity that we thought would be good places to start. So our 3 vulture safe zones will be the Kruger Lowveld area, the Kalahari in the north, and the central Karoo in the middle of the country. So we'll start off with just as an example, we'll use the central Karoo site, which is here, and it's 23,000 hectares, so a huge part of land, and the aim of this vulture safe zone is to protect the endangered Cape vulture, to try and bring it back to areas where it historically roosted and nested within the safe zone. And the stakeholders will be dealing with our farmers, game breeders, private reserves, and sand parks. So if we enlarge this, we can see the green areas are some nature reserves within that spot. There's also game farms and agricultural farms, a whole array of different privately owned land. And the red stars are those 4 historical colonies where Cape vultures used to breed, and they don't anymore. So the idea is that by liaising with individual properties, we can slowly remove those threats, eventually culminating to most, if not all, of this huge area being covered where people have committed and are acting to remove those threats. And by doing this, we'll have sustainable land management practices that will benefit vultures, obviously, our aim, but also people and other wildlife, so it's a win for everyone. So involved in this is our collision risk modelling. I think there was a question about this after the plenaries. We'll be using tracking data to look at the movement ecology of Cape vultures to see where they go and how they move in the landscape. And using this information, we'll develop a collision risk assessment model. And this is in relation to one of the threats related to energy infrastructure, the wind turbines. And then after doing that model, we'll be able to propose new guidelines for wind energy developments. and with the ultimate aim of reducing mortalities for kid vultures. So quickly to touch on our poison, our wildlife poison training, because Garrett's going to be talking about this later, but we aim to empower people on the ground who will be in the field and who might stumble across a mass poisoning site like this one pictured here. And we train them to respond quickly and effectively to wildlife poisoning scenes. And they're conducted in areas where there already are a lot of wildlife poisoning incidents. And each member of the group in each area, at least one person, should be issued with a poisoning response kit, which enables two things. Firstly, to get rid of the poison carcasses and the source of the poison, usually by burning it like this. And then also to collect evidence, which is a really important part of it, so that we can try and prosecute and stop this happening again. So collaborations are a big, big part of our work. A lot of you guys in this room, we're very lucky to work with, and we appreciate everything you do. Ultimately, we're working towards implementing the recommendations in this document, as Brent said, our Bible for the vulture group, our management plan for old world vultures, which includes African vultures. So we have a number of research collaborations and a number of conservation partners, and we couldn't do this work without you guys. As Brent eloquently put it, and as the Springboks taught us this weekend, work is so much stronger, as with everything in life, if we work together. So thank you so much.